I'm Miwa Messer. I'm the producer and host of Poured Over, and I've been reading John Edgar Wideman since I was a teenager, and I will own that. And that means it's been more than a decade or so since I've been reading the former Rhodes Scholar, MacArthur Genius Grant recipient, two-time PEN Faulkner Award winner. I mean, the accolades go and go and go. And there's a new essay collection that's really 50 years worth of work. It's criticism, it's introductions to books, it is a little bit of personal essay. It's a whole new side of John Edgar Wideman collected in one space. And it's not that he hasn't been doing the work, but I am a little more familiar with the novels than I am with the collected nonfiction. So, John Edgar Wideman, it is so nice to see you. Thank you for making the time. But if I remember correctly, Slaveroad has a note about the creation of Languages of Home, which is this new essay collection, and you were a little suspicious of doing this book. Do I have that right?
I'm suspicious of any book.
Okay, fair
I'm
enough.
suspicious of language. I'm suspicious of the whole enterprise of writing.
Yeah,
I worry about cultural hierarchies.
yeah,
I worry about the way that words can become commodified.
yep.
So I guess I'm a worried kind of person, worried kind of guy. I was a worried kind of kid. Where do I fit in, et cetera, et cetera. So yes, I'll accept that. Worried.
But I got to sit down with this book without the background that you obviously have with it, right? I'm coming to it solely as a reader and a bit of a fan. And it's really kind of fascinating watching the evolution of you, right? We start with sort of the Charles Chestnuts, and there's a introduction to an old Terry McMillan anthology that I hadn't thought about in a minute, and I'm like, oh right, I remember owning that book. There are profiles of Michael Jordan and Dennis Rodman and Denzel Washington and Spike Lee. I mean, it's a map of our cultural history too. It's
I
not,
hope so.
yeah,
I hope so. With emphasis on the hour.
yeah,
And the hour, from my point of view, OUR,
yep,
should certainly include the oral tradition,
mm-hmm,
the stories that I heard, hence languages of home, as well as the Joseph Conrads and the Virginia Woolfs and the Toni Morrisons and the Richard Wrights. There is a language that is encompassing all of us. And there's a language beyond that, which we don't really exactly understand, but pick at with the English or the French or the Italian
mm-hmm.
or the German that we use as a native language or a language of home.
Yeah, I had mentioned to you before we started taping that you got me to pick up Heart of Darkness. And anyone who knows me in real life knows that I have a complicated relationship with Conrad. I am deeply envious of the fact that the man could write in three languages. You know, the bulk of the work that I know him for was written in his third language, English, after I think Polish and French. Do I have that correct?
Yes,
Okay. And for the sheer pleasure, I guess, of the reading. I mean, the man can write without a doubt. I mean, the things that I have issue with are certainly not things he would have been aware of in 18, whatever it was that he was writing this book. And it holds. I mean, you and I are talking about this book now 150 years after it was first published, or maybe 130 years after. I don't have my timeline exact, but it surfaces in a couple of different places. And so I pick up Heart of Darkness. I pick up Edward Said's Conrad book, which started as his thesis and then he went back and added the letters and whatnot. I pick up Malcolm X, the autobiography of Malcolm X. I pick up Gail Jones and Corregidora because there's, all of these influences, all of these pieces that come together for you. Virginia Woolf is sort of always burbling in the back of my brain, but I can't read you without ending up on a much larger playing field than I may have planned on. And yet, you didn't really start thinking about being a writer until your senior year in college. You're at UPenn on a basketball scholarship and figuring out what you've sort of hit a literary crowd. But it's when you get to Oxford as a Rhodes Scholar where you're like, you know what, this writing thing is going to be what I want to do. You're the second Black Rhodes Scholar in American history. Were you profiled in Look magazine when you were at UPenn, or was that when you were at Oxford?
That was before I went to
Okay.
Oxford,
Okay.
just before sort of I was awarded the Rhodes, and that became a big story.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and I'm not sure when it actually was published. I have a couple copies of it
Uh-huh.
still sitting around, but I don't remember the publishing
Right.
date.
Okay. The reason I raise all of that, though, is you pull from so many different places in your own work, and yet you're still very grounded in the idea that all stories are true, that literature is about the sort of cultural identification. And by that, I don't mean necessarily how we each individually see ourselves, but in the capture of a larger culture, like in the Homewood trilogy, for instance, which is set in and around the neighborhood you grew up in, Pittsburgh. And I know the books were never designed as a trilogy, but they are currently available as a book called the Homewood Trilogy, which is how I'm going to refer to them in this conversation. But the idea that you can capture kind of the soul of a place and its people in a book, a little bit like Faulkner. I mean, we are dipping into Faulknerian territory here.
You are
Mm-hmm.
in your comments, your reactions. Um, you're talking about something that happened for me, not necessarily at the
Okay.
beginning
Okay.
as an idea,
Okay.
as a destination, as something I was pushing for.
Okay.
Uh, Everything in writing is process. You put that first word down, and another word follows, and another word follows,
Mm-hmm.
or it doesn't.
Right.
And maybe those 20 words you write are put away or thrown away, or
Mm-hmm.
you're ashamed of them the next time you pick them up, or you see they're stupid, or you see, hey, I don't really know what I said in those 20 or 30 or 50 words. And so then you go on.
Mm-hmm.
You put some more words down. Maybe you go and read a book. Maybe you go out and play some hoop.
Yeah.
Process,
Okay.
process. And so it sounds so premeditated and in a way beautiful to
Mm-hmm.
think that there's some sort of organic spring from which good writing, the best writing comes.
Okay.
But it's a matter of all those mysterious things that nobody really understands. And how we put it together is with the force of readers and writers and the imagination that is shared by human beings, all human beings.
What are some of those things that we don't understand that you're referring
Death,
to? Okay.
death, start there.
Okay.
I have an obsession, I guess, with time.
Yeah, you do.
And even as a child, time was quite uh, scary to me.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't like to walk in the cemetery. I
Right.
liked to go to the Memorial Day parade, but I didn't want to go to the part of the parade that marched through the cemetery.
Got it.
And same with the pre-Veterans Day celebrations that we did. I do not like the end, and that's fear. That's a kid's fear of
Mm-hmm.
death. It probably has something to do with the fact that I was very close to my grandfather, and I lost him at about the age of 10 or
Ah,
11.
okay.
And that scared the dookie out of
Mm-hmm.
me.
Okay.
It just took me the longest time to understand. I don't understand to this day why he was not available.
Mm-hmm.
And so death is tied up also in that sense because it was my grandfather and a man I loved, a man
Mm-hmm.
who took care of me, a man who put me on his shoulders and walked me around the Homewood streets. It's also tied up with intimacy
Yeah.
and family. And in a way, I am working to separate death from horror and mystery and ugliness and
Mm-hmm.
war. But on the other hand, I keep coming back to a connection, family, and mortality,
Mm-hmm.
and the necessity to at least knock on the door of
Right.
immortality and listen. What happens? What's on the other side of that door? Is there anything when you when you rap on that door? And that's
Ha-
what I literally do, rap sometimes.
this I know, but I also know you've written how many books at this point? 18?
You got it.
I think it's
Whatever you say, I agree.
I think
I'll
it's
sit here and nod since I
I
don't
well I
know.
was yeah, I was about to say it's oh, you know what? I'm just gonna it's way more than
A
18.
lot, a lot, a lot.
But part of me is thinking, isn't that also, I mean, the work lasts beyond your corporal being, right? Like the work will always be around.
One hopes, but one doesn't know what always means.
Okay, fair.
Some smart writer said, it's scary enough to think of my own mortality,
Mm-hmm.
but I can kind of get my head around that.
Mm-hmm.
But to think of my country's mortality,
Right.
that is mysterious. I can't get my head around that.
But you still, I mean, in earlier interviews, you've always sort of made it clear that the writing is how thinking is writing and writing is thinking for you. And for you to understand where you are sort of in time and space, in your own person, as it were, you need to do the work, you need to do the writing, and that's how you work through whatever might be itching at you.
Well, again, the process.
Yep.
That's not a magic word, but some days when I start writing,
Hmm.
I don't, or most times I don't exactly know where I'm going to go or where I'm going to stop. But the writing is a kind of putting footprints in time,
Yeah.
making footprints in time, even though those footprints are not visible with the eyes and you don't hear the steps.
Hmm.
But when the writing becomes useful to me, and ideally maybe useful to somebody else,
Hmm.
it really is tracing a trajectory in time.
Hmm.
And that's what I'm after, and that's what's satisfying. It gets me from the place I happen to be sitting and trying to conjure other spaces, other people, trying to get outside my own skin, remember stuff. That that the only or the best way I know to get out of that the stasis
Hmm.
of sitting and what doing art, writing a book,
Yeah.
is allowing those footsteps in time, that invisible passage, becoming part of it,
Okay.
seeking it, embodying myself there.
So that's how we get to character then. If for you, the passage of time is the thing that reveals character. Am I right in saying that?
I think that's well said.
Okay, because I'm thinking about, for instance, in the center novel of the Homewood trilogy, we've got Bess to Clement to Tommy, and we alternate their point of view, and it is what's the time frame for that particular novel? It takes place over. It's not a weekend. It's sort of a nebulous
Well, I think
period
I
of
need
time.
I need the readers
You need a
uh,
reader's guide. Okay.
benefit of the doubt and a better memory than I have. But I'm asking the readers benefit of the doubt in the same
Sure.
way that Joyce does in the
Yeah, yeah.
beginning of Ulysses.
Mm-hmm.
You know you're in Dublin,
Yep.
but then if you're going to follow the book, if you're going to continue to read the
Mm-hmm.
book, you have to realize you're taking excursions into the past and future
Right.
of more than one character's life. It's not simply a stream of consciousness, it's streams of
Right.
consciousness and the weirdness and the enlightening way that these various streams come together to make a present tense, to make a now.
I mean, it's not unlike what Wolf is doing in Mrs. Dalloway either, the way she plays with time and how we get a picture. I mean, there's so many people who think of Dalloway as sort of this nice little domestic novel about some lady's dinner party, and it's like, well, actually it's a novel about war, and it is a direct descendant of Ulysses and the Odyssey, but okay. And the way people are kind of like, well, is it really, and like, it's not just a novel about a dinner party, it's really not. But I love the idea that you can use time as a framework for the interiority of your characters, time for the evolution of your characters. I mean, one of the things I quite enjoy about reading you is that I see the evolution of your voice over time. Like there's always been this voice that I think of as you. I mean, you love a long sentence. I will follow you down long sentences. But
Ah,
yeah, I mean, listen, there's some sentences in this. There's some pieces where you're talking about Charles Chestnut a little bit. There's a bit with the Malcolm X. Um, but I love listening to it's very musical what you're doing on the page. And again, that feels like you're pulling inspiration not just from other writers, but certainly from musicians, but also basketball. We have to talk about basketball a little bit, and I'm hoping I can hold my own with you because you know the game much better than I do. I like watching it, but you know it. Um, but let's talk about improvisation for a second because it's something that actually Michael Jordan raises in his interview that you did with him ages ago that's in Languages of Home. 1990. 1990, you're interviewing Jordan, and one of the things he says is the way I play is all about improvisation. And I feel like some of that happens with you in the short stories. I mean, certainly Philadelphia Fire, but I want to come back to that in a second. How do you feel about improvisation? Do you feel like that is something you use?
I feel about improvisation the way it feels about me.
Which is?
That is to say, uh, we're inseparable. Jordan, meeting Jordan and talking to him, and of course, watching him play,
Mm-hmm.
uh, was for me both enlightening and a model.
Yeah.
But I also saw places places and ideas
Yeah.
that I had already been acquainted with.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, after all, the game of basketball, is sort of organized to highlight improvisation if it's played a certain way.
Right.
And I'm a young person who grew up at a time when basketball in college anyway, and even in my high school in Pittsburgh in Peabody High,
Mm-hmm.
was coach monitored. It was hierarchical.
Mm-hmm.
There was a hierarchy of authority, and the player was way almost out of the picture. You just took orders. You followed a pattern. Someone else imposed the pattern. And of course, you had to do it. I mean, you had to make the shot, but
Mm-hmm.
there was a way that you were taught and you practiced to make that shot possible, to get a certain person on your team open, to get the other team backing away, etc. So, and all that was seen as something almost scientific, that process.
Mm-hmm.
And it worked because you listened to an authority, to the coaches, and also because there was a version of basketball in people's heads that mimicked, imitated basketball as it had been played up to that moment.
Mm-hmm.
But of course, things don't stand still. Basketball didn't stand still.
Right.
Different people played the game. Uh, People who had skills that the generation before them wouldn't even have dreamed of.
Right.
And so the game grows. And if improvisation wasn't there as a factor, it would be a dictatorship still, coaches telling players what to do. But heck, even at the high school level,
Mm-hmm.
uh, when I played, the idea that there was some independence, that you
Right.
had to find the players who could internalize the rules
Mm-hmm.
and use the rules in the particular situation, which itself was never predictable, but always changing.
You just made me think of something about punctuation and grammar when you're talking about the rules of basketball, right? And you've got to have a framework. And obviously, you've been teaching writing for a very, very long time. I mean, you've taught at the University of Wyoming, UMass Amherst, Brown, Penn. Am I missing any? I'm missing someone. Wasn't there a fifth school?
UMass.
Oh, I got UMass. Okay. You have been teaching writing for a really long time. You've got to know what sort of the basic rules of engagement are before you take the form and turn it inside out. I mean, that's fair to say?
That's fair to say. It's also fair to say in the course of that teaching of
Uh-huh.
writing, I learned a lot from my students.
Okay.
They
Okay.
taught me about writing, both by what they actually achieved, what they
Uh-huh.
actually got down on the page, but also in my conferences with them and the kind of writing they did, the sort of reading they had done before they got to me,
Hmm.
so that it wasn't always cordial even. There were real issues of what correct meant, what was
Right.
good, how long sentences should be, and
Right.
you could translate that in terms of grammar or in terms of sentence length or
Hmm.
vocabulary. But
Hmm.
in fact, it was the actual play of writing itself,
Okay.
which was engaging us and both separating us and putting us in the same classroom. It's weird
Yeah.
uh, because now, from the point of view of almost 8 decades,
Hmm.
at least 7 decades of writing and writing, I realized that a very simple process went on for
Yep.
me. Um, all the writing, all the models, all the living, all the examples, all the rules I
Hmm.
would ever need, I received as a child growing up in the community I grew up in. And those were never totally encompassed
Hmm.
by the larger world outside that small Homewood community.
Right.
I could find that larger world in Homewood, just as some people thought they had my world pigeonholed within the world that as they understood it.
Was your grandfather one of the people who taught you how to tell stories? Because it sounds like your Aunt Fanny definitely was one of those people. Your grandmother, like it just, there were a lot of women telling stories in your childhood.
More the women telling the stories than the men.
Yeah.
I think this is not a rule, but I'm guessing now we seem to be friendly, so I can just say what I need to say. I don't remember the men talking so much to the younger guys as talking to one another.
Right.
And sort of one measure of growing up was when you were allowed to listen
Mm,
in
mm,
almost incidentally to these conversations. They weren't for you. They weren't directed to you as a very young man. Sometimes that was a simple fact that they were often in bars or in places
right.
where younger kids weren't supposed to be.
Right.
But kids were around women. Younger kids were
Mm,
around women all day,
yeah.
and the women didn't change their storytelling habits. And so knowing that kids were listening did not change in lots of substantial ways what
Hmm.
was said. So we were an audience for them, sometimes intentional, sometimes not. And
Hmm.
of course, the women had in their minds a very clear idea of what the men's stories might
Right.
contain about them, contain about marriage, contain about power, et cetera, et cetera. And so the smart women, and plenty of them were very smart, were working on us to give us an alternative vision. And therefore, their stories had a lot at stake for
Mm.
them and for us.
You also described those stories, though, as common property, and that the truth would sort of unspool as the sort of there's sort of a chorus of stories happening, right? The stories belong not just to the family, but also to the community. And the stakes, it sounded like the stakes would go up with each telling. It's like, well, how do I outdo the last person who told this story? And all I can think of as a tiny person, I would have absolutely loved that. Like, I was the kid sitting at the top of the stairs when my parents threw cocktail parties because I'm like, what are you up to? What are you doing? What am I missing?
Oh yeah, yeah, yeah. I
All of
mean,
that.
look, the spaces and the gaps
Right.
in the stories, both of information or just simple facts. Those gaps were crucial because in the storytelling process, as it existed in Homewood and in
Hmm.
my home and
Right.
other homes of the community, was one in which it was give and take.
Right.
There weren't necessarily solid lines. There wasn't one version. The beauty of the stories was uh, Betty, how could you do that?
Yeah.
That man, is he still doing what he's doing now? Now, why'd you listen to him? Why'd you go back to him? Or who makes the money in that house? Don't you know? Haven't you ever counted it? And so there was this challenge and response and opening and dynamism in the stories. And that is exactly what you are recalling when you sat at the
Yeah.
top of the stairs, because they weren't finished stories.
Right.
There were stories that were moving along, that were dealing with a reality that never stood still, a reality that still had some potential and possibility. Other than that, um, it's just like it's just like the threat of death.
Hmm.
If you if you are obsessed, if
Hmm.
you are too frightened by immortality,
Right.
then you don't have the energy to actually put up the kind of struggle in a life that makes a life worthwhile.
Right.
And so these stories were clearly almost intentionally instructive,
Hmm.
but not dictatorial, not finished. The stories were unfinished. They needed another consciousness, other energy. They needed the young people to enter them
Hmm.
and be part of them, and to not to finish them, but to add.
They needed a listener, and the
Well, that's a
stories needed
certain
listeners.
kind of listening. Yes,
Yeah.
yes. I mean, somebody who yells at you, "Listen to me, boy." That tone of voice, those
Right.
words already say it's not about listening. It's about
Power.
just power and
Yeah.
taking what I say as the way things are.
No, but when you specifically mentioned instructive, that's, I mean, part of your cadence on the page also does come from the Methodist Church, the AME Church. I mean, that was part of your family's story. And you do pick up on, I mean, you pick up on people's cadences, right? And we're talking about a generation, your grandparents, your parents, your aunts, your uncles, who were raised in that very kind of specific experience of the Black church. And the way sermons are delivered and sort of, and not just the actual rhetorical devices, but the language itself.
You're,
And I
you're
feel like that translates through you as well when I'm reading
Well, you're absolutely correct about that. The only thing I would add
you.
is that um, there were many styles,
Okay.
not one.
Okay.
The way Reverend Felder spoke in
Hmm.
Homewood AME Zion was very different than the way Elder Watt spoke in AME Zion.
Okay.
One being rural and minimal education and using repetition and a kind of as much as words to get across a point.
Hmm.
And then Reverend Felder, who was quite articulate. But then not only did we have those kinds of differences in style, but other media or other forms of expression were integrated so that there's a rich field of
Hmm.
styles, not one uh, ghetto sort of undertone
Hmm.
uh, uh, or style of speech. There are many, many styles of speech, and part of the challenge of a kid was learning how to negotiate that
Right.
and how to separate the worth of a particular utterance from how it was uttered,
Mm-hmm.
or giving it more worth because of how it was uttered. And that made us quite responsive and made us listeners of a very specific kind.
Um, there's a moment, and I'm trying to, it might have actually been one of the pieces in Languages of Home, but you talk about Ralph Ellison. Uh, I'm looking for the exact line because the way you say it. Oh, right. Invisible Man came first, educating our palates. And the idea that Ellison, and Invisible Man is a book that I hold very close and I like to reread it. And I love the fact that it holds up. It's still so funny. But the idea of Ellison educating our palates. So you go from this very oral tradition of family stories and being a really active listener, right? You have got to pay attention to what the adults are saying if you want to figure out, where you get to the next step kind of thing. And then here you are, you're discovering Ellison in college, right? Or high school?
Right,
Okay, so
right.
college. So you get to college. Penn is a very different experience from Homewood in Pittsburgh. It is not necessarily the easiest landing for you, but you do find a literary community. You do discover Woolf and T.S. Eliot and James Joyce and Faulkner, all of these. You're pulling from all of these places. But when do you start to really find your voice and not the voice that is just pulling and processing all? I know you talk about writing as a process, but at the same time, you're navigating two not separate spheres, but parallel spheres. How do you get the voice that I think of when I think of John Edgar Wideman on the page?
Well, I think I'm still finding it. I'm still working on it. It's a work in progress.
Okay.
Where does your voice come from? One would have to say, in a way, if I'm not being presumptuous,
Mhm.
maybe something in your voice comes from from elements that you picked up in my voice.
Absolutely. I would not
So so
hesitate
so
to agree
so
with
so,
that.
so there we go.
Yeah,
We have this live medium,
right.
and as live as a Gershwin tune in the
Mhm.
hands of John Coltrane or Stevie Wonder, or you name it, somebody, uh, Ray Charles, or uh, uh, Thelonious Monk, same
Mhm.
tune.
Yep.
But boy, oh boy, uh, you know, um, it will never be the same after all these brothers and sisters have negotiated it and turned out a version and put something for your palate to be, and put something out there for your palate to be educated.
Mhm.
And so we're all, uh, the vision of language I have, and the vision I would like to have for my own writing, is this live thing that
Mhm.
grows and changes and is absolutely shared, absolutely important, because it includes a dynamic, it includes an intelligence that
Mhm.
wants to be shared.
There's another thing you follow up that riff on Ellison with, and you say, great writers are always teaching us how to read them. And I love the idea that if language is the live wire on the page, right, that language is, and we're not necessarily talking about slang. We are talking about the evolution of language, right? Like, if you think about how far language has evolved, maybe in the last 10 years versus the evolution of language in the 70s, like the 70s felt like we were still sort of struggling a little bit with how we were going to describe things. Like we just still kind of didn't have a
We
fluid.
didn't have a language
Yeah.
for it.
And now we
We
do.
acted it out with our bodies.
Yeah. Yeah.
In many ways, we acted it out with our political gestures.
Hmm. Hmm.
And the language part was always there, but certainly not as public.
Right.
Uh, how people talked in private, how lovers talked, how people talked across, and I hate to use the word races because they don't exist, but
Hmm.
how they talked across colors and across economic lines. That was so important and so possible. And now after the 80s, 90s, and all
Hmm.
the structuralism and abstraction,
Hmm.
we have developed another sort of language to look back and try to make sense of these other decades. But in fact, the same problems existed for those languages of structuralism, for instance, that existed in the language of classical rhetoric. That is their self-importance and their closed offness, if I can coin a word,
Hmm.
from great portions
Hmm.
of the population.
And that evolution of language is going to send us back in time for two. I want to talk about the autobiography of Malcolm X for a second. There's a piece in the new book that you had written years ago, and it reading it now and reading it, a month ago, made me reconsider the tone of Alex Haley's autobiography of Malcolm X. And by this, you're talking about the blandness of the language. And, the way we were certainly taught Malcolm X in general in American school, like we just weren't, I wasn't, it wasn't until I was an adult where I actually understood sort of where he fit in the world and, young 20s kind of thing. But when you're talking about writing about Malcolm X, you say it's part mourning, it's part myth, but the registers of language become a shorthand for how we experience the culture around the man. And so here I am reconsidering a book that I've read multiple times over the years and certainly came to as a teenager, but never actually thought of the language as bland. But it's kind of the equivalent of like that mid-Atlantic non-accent that newscasters have. And I realize it's an intentional tool on Haley's part. It's not, I mean, it's to broaden the audience for this
Well,
book.
well, well, suppose Haley had tried to be more of a ventriloquist.
Right.
Not, no, excuse me, made, if he had tried to make Malcolm speak street street talk,
Right. I don't
what
think it
what
would have
would have
worked.
happened? Not only wouldn't it have worked, it wouldn't have gotten published.
Right.
There's that constraint. There's that coach,
Mm-hmm.
invisible maybe in this case, but
Mm-hmm.
certainly there. The same coach we deal with, a writer today
Mm-hmm.
deals with. How
Right.
do you get Houghton Mifflin? How do you get Simon and Schuster
Right.
to even consider your book? Well, now if you write it in ghettoese, that might be uh, one way to get it published.
Mm.
No
Barney
matter how
Rossett.
stupid, no
Oh,
matter how stupid it was, that just the cultural moment
right.
is accepting and says, "Hey, we need these, don't not need them, but
Mm.
let's have more books. Let's sell more books like that,
Right.
or we can sell more books written in ghettoese." So that's what becomes the stand or the mode of expression that writers have to use if they want to be published.
Part of what makes me laugh, though, too, is Barney Rossett of Grove Press is actually the original publisher of the autobiography of Malcolm X, and he was publishing D.H. Lawrence when Lawrence was still being, basically banned in Boston. D.H. Lawrence, okay, and Barney was doing this sort of avant-garde kind of thing, and I'm like, but this is not an avant-garde story. It's not an avant-garde voice. It's not an avant-garde structure. It's a very straightforward, this has become sort of it's become a modern classic for a reason, but the idea that the language is so sort of, you know, newscaster.
Safe.
But you also are in Cairo in 92. You're with Spike Lee on the set of Malcolm X. The Denzel Washington profile comes a little later, and you describe Spike Lee's movies as being picaresque, like picaresque novels, which I love the idea of that. I mean, especially his Malcolm X film, which I didn't realize he had rewritten the Baldwin version. You know, there's this legendary story that James Baldwin had written a screenplay about the life of Malcolm X that was never produced. And so Spike Lee takes that, turns it into the movie we now know. But there you are in Cairo, watching Spike Lee do his thing and noticing all of the details that maybe someone who's not a novelist might not pick up on.
I had fun.
Yeah.
I'll just start there. And I was overwhelmed by by Cairo itself
Hmm.
and by that immersion in Eastern culture for me.
Right.
I'd never been anywhere close to that. Well, when I was an undergraduate, my friend and I crossed the channel and I went to Morocco. And so,
Okay.
yes, I did see some stuff and heard Arabic
Hmm.
spoken, et cetera, et cetera. But being with the crew for the movie, it
Hmm.
was an open door to all levels of the society and all kinds of people. But also, it was fun to watch. Oh, here's this new world to me. Well, look
Right.
at look at that mosque. Look at that tile work. Look at those
Yeah.
shoes. Look at the veils. That's all new, but here's Spike Lee coming along, and he is going to represent all this in a movie, which is
Hmm.
another level of make believe, which is another level of needing your imagination. So I have all these imaginary Muslim
Hmm.
worlds,
Right.
Kairos floating through my head.
Right.
And how do I negotiate those? How
Hmm.
do I make sense of those? How do they bleed into one another?
Hmm.
How does Spike Lee clean up a street corner so that there's no traffic and then get all these old-timey cars
Right.
on the street? And it was just fascinating, just fun for me. And I'm grateful that I had that opportunity.
But in a way, too, you're translating Spike Lee's film vision onto the page. Like the idea of writer
His
is
translation. I'm
exactly.
translating
Yes,
his
that is
translation.
exact.
Excuse me.
Yes. And but I love that idea, right? And translation is something that pops up in your work. I mean, it pops up in lots of different ways, whether you're translating Homewood in a way for someone who's not necessarily familiar with the community, but the idea and so Philadelphia Fire, which you wrote in 19, well, it came out in 1990. It is centered on the bombing of the Move house in Philadelphia in 1985, which is a true story. If you don't know the story, please. There are books by Mike Africa. There is a novel by Ayanna Mathis called The Unsettled. There is lots of literature now. You can figure it all out. But the thing about this novel, too, and it has stuck with me since I first read it in 1990, and it stuck with me for a very long time, is structurally you do some really interesting things. We meet our narrator who shares some of your life, but is trying to find one of the children who has run from the scene of this horrific bombing. And he's trying to find this kid so he can write about the kid. And so he's taken from the world that he's living in on this island in Greece, Mykonos, comes back to Philadelphia, but he's again sort of on an island in West Philadelphia, right on Osage Avenue. And then in the second part of the book, we get dropped into something that made me think for a second. I was reading a little more closely to you, not autobiography, but a little bit of autofiction. But it's built around the Tempest. And Caliban becomes sort of this undercurrent. The character of Caliban
Mm.
becomes an undercurrent. And then in the third section, we do not necessarily a little time travel, but the narrator is sort of grounded in a moment in history. And I don't want to spoil it. And I'm not actually spoiling it by saying it's broken out into three pieces and this weird thing happens. But the structure of this book and the way it never loses sight of how we got here, which is this heinous act, but you play with time, you play with this sense of isolation, you play with this idea. I mean, island is isolate, right? Island is metaphor. And then you throw in Shakespeare and the Tempest. And you start talking about how in West Philadelphia suddenly there were all these 10-year-olds running around because they're they're learning how to put on the Tempest. And it's a very John Edgar Wideman, not like, I'm not sure anyone else could have done this novel and got me to stay with it and believe the voice that I'm with. This book is wild. This is it, and it still holds up all these years later.
A, my dear, thank you for your reading and your thoughtfulness. Um, I'm very demanding of my readers. I'm
Hmm.
no less demanding of my readers than I am of myself.
Right.
But and here I'm going to leap back to Spike Lee
Okay.
and Cairo
Hmm.
because that second, I think it's the second part of the book section as you were uh, pulling it
Yeah.
apart and pulling it
Hmm.
together. Um, the
Okay.
Tempest part.
Yeah.
That's a play.
Oh, yes, it is.
That's make believe.
Yes, it
What a
is.
play. What make
Hmm.
believe. But I'm writing a make believe account of that.
Yeah.
And so we have the same sort of phenomenon at the center of that novel as maybe I experienced at the center of my trip to Egypt
Yeah.
to make Malcolm X.
Right.
There is this pulsating energy in an imaginative work
Yep.
that can that can capture real time, personal time,
Hmm.
actual people, people in the news, and bring them all together, and boom,
Yeah.
you find yourself re-experiencing all those elements that make up a sort of an ordinary life, and we don't usually have take the time and energy to think about connected
Hmm.
or separate.
You translated the experience. This is the thing, like we're so limited in our use of the word translation, right? That we always just say, oh, well, we're translating from another language into English, right? And part of me is like, well, no, the whole point of a novel and short stories too, but I want to stick with the novel just for a second because it gives us a chance to really work on the interiority. And short stories, I mean, they have the beats are different, right? Like even in a novel as short as Philadelphia Fire, which is what, less than 200 pages. It's like
Seemed
190.
like a long
Yeah,
novel to me.
it's like 196 pages. Yes, I'm sure it's much longer for you in the writing than it was for me in the reading. But the idea that you can take this moment in our shared American history and translate it into something that is so intimate and human scaled, right? It goes from being a thing that you saw on television or read in the newspapers to wait, it is actually about human beings, right? Like, isn't that what fiction is designed for? Or at least I think
Well,
it is.
I took a trip to Cairo, yeah, an actual
Yep.
trip. So I
Yep.
was there and I met
Right.
these guys and hung out with Denzel, hung out with Spike Lee, et cetera, the actors, the
Yeah. Yeah.
photographers. Well, Philadelphia Fire contains a kind of meditation on the same sorts of experiences, personal, actual experiences I had. I knew Teresa Africa. I knew the people in Move. I knew the mayor.
Mm-hmm.
I knew all the involved individuals.
Mm-hmm.
Um, so I had that jump start, and I
Mm-hmm.
also had that obligation. You, my obligation, as I wrote the piece, was clearly translation,
Yeah.
but also translation as we've been talking about,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
as you've talked about, but also the sense of translation as a bodily uh, change,
Mm-hmm.
as in religion, as in the translation of a spirit into another spirit. And that if my books can do that, if I could do that in the writing, if my writing did that for me, then boy, I'm on to something. I'm on to something that is as old as human beings are old. That notion of translation, and there's where that's where death comes in again. Because what happens when we're not in the form we are now,
Mm-hmm.
you and I, luckily at this moment.
Right.
What's the next form?
Right.
Where how do we translate,
Mm-hmm.
and how does it affect us? But nothing morbid, because it's inevitable. and
Right.
it's on its way, but it's already in that sense it's already over.
I'm going to quote you again for a second. This is from the introduction that you wrote for a Zora Neale Hurston uh, volume. And you said translations ask us to forget as well as imagine an original. And I mean, if that doesn't sum you up, right? Like, again, yes, you do ask the reader to participate in ways that maybe not everyone does. But I mean, I'm still laughing. I'm looking at this copy of Heart of Darkness, and I'm like, yeah, of course, only John Edgar Wideman would get me back to that book. But okay, I'm there. I read it. It's okay. And I will, again, I'm glad it exists in the world. I have complicated feelings about it, but yes, I picked it up because I knew I was sitting down with you, and I was like, it's been a minute since I've read this book. I really should look at it. So the idea that we can translate our own experiences through books is pretty cool.
And that it never goes away when it's
Right.
good. Thank you. You mentioned or you brought up probably
Yep.
more than one Zora Neale Hurston,
Yep.
and in terms of translation and language,
Hmm.
there's no other writer who's as important or
Yep.
more important than her for me.
Yep.
Because whatever else she does, when she has her lady return from her wanderings and sit down on the
Yep.
back porch and talk to her friend, um, I read that book and I've read it many times, and it is a poetic undertaking. The narrator recites a poem to
Hmm.
her friend.
Hmm.
And whenever I'm writing, I try to remind myself, hey, does this have the energy, the rhythm, the inner life, the many lives of poetry?
Yeah.
And if it doesn't, if the prose is not partaking of that Zora
Hmm.
Neale Hurston specialty that she does so beautifully and understands so well, then
Hmm.
I gotta rewrite because I'm losing my anchor.
Yeah, I would like you to not lose your anchor, please.
At
I
least
get
not
it.
on the air. At least
Yeah.
not.
I get a lot of pleasure from the work that you do, which I know it is complicated writing sometimes, but just the vision of the world that's there. And speaking of vision, how are you feeling now that Languages of Home is out? I mean, when you were writing that little reference in Slaveroad, which is also now out in paperback, by the way, so if you haven't read it, go pick that up as well. Languages of Home, how are you feeling now seeing this single volume in the world? It's right behind me, actually. There it is. There's the spine. Like
Yay,
this is out now. This is
yay,
this is in the
yes,
world.
yay. Well, sort of. It's released,
It
but we're still waiting for the bookstores to make their orders and the people to walk out with cartons
Yeah.
under their arms. But yes, it's out there. I've seen it. You can touch it, can lift it, can smell it, and that's not bad.
But it's also the evolution of at least part of your work. I mean, are you less worried than you were when you started the project?
It's intimidating.
Okay.
This that book represents what over probably over a half century of writing, and I can't look in that direction and without a certain kind of sense of melancholy,
Mm-hmm.
uh, maybe even a sense of loss.
Wow.
But that's not all.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'm still here,
Yep.
and I still feel the music, and I enjoy the music. And this is a record.
Yeah.
This being the book,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Languages of Home. Uh, for better or worse, it's one person's journey,
Right.
documented and accessible and concrete. And it's for the kids.
Yeah.
It's for younger people,
Mm-hmm.
people who didn't live through all these things.
Right.
And that gives me satisfaction that there is a record. There is something for them to look at other than what other people think about what's happened in the past
Yeah.
half century.
So as much as I think that we're of course bumping up on time, but one last thing before you go, I have to sort of ask about this. We've talked a lot about Woolf and Joseph Conrad and, sort of Ulysses. Whenever you bring James Joyce or Faulkner into the conversation, I mean, we are talking about classics of world literature that are, some would call canon. And I feel like when I read you, though, that maybe that's the starting point, but there's so much more I mean, you've been writing for decades. Let's call it decades, right? I
Half a
mean,
century.
half a century. Okay, so half a century you've been writing, but I feel like as much as that might be the foundation, it's not everything. Am I right about that?
There was a very particular transition.
Okay.
Sometimes critics pick up on it, and sometimes they pick up on it for the wrong reason, but there was a transition.
Okay.
I had to go from a kind of young writers' absolute adoration and imitation of the classics to finding that even if I was able to do exactly what some of those other folks did, it would not have covered the territory I wanted to cover. So therefore, uh, uh, I was enthralled with the great tradition. But by the time I was 40 years old, 30 years old, something like that, I could say to myself, I don't want to be a great American writer. I want to be a great writer. Tradition went far beyond national and one language. It became art. It became painting. It became singing. It became light dancing. I had to find my own way, and I had my roots, and I was deeply, deeply immersed and formed by those roots.
And I got some great reading out of it. John Edgar Wideman, thank you so much for joining us on Poured Over.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening. Poured Over is a Barnes & Noble production. To help other readers find us, please rate and review the show wherever you listen to podcasts.